A man fired by his own company returned 12 years later and transformed Apple from near collapse to world-changing power. How did Steve Jobs accomplish this impossible transformation? This story will show you that your biggest failure might actually be the beginning of your greatest triumph. This isn't just a technology story. This is proof of how vision, passion, and never giving up can change the entire world. If you're ready, let's begin this incredible journey from Steve Jobs' firing from Apple to tech history's greatest comeback. February 24th, 1955, Stephen Paul Jobs was born in San Francisco, but he was immediately given up for adoption by a young mother he never knew. A couple named Paul and Clara Jobs adopted this baby. Paul was a machinist, Clara was an accountant. A middle-class family, but a very loving home. My real parents were Paul and Clara Jobs, Steve would say years later. They chose me. They were the people who wanted me, not the ones who abandoned me. But Steve realized he was different from an early age. When he learned he was adopted, he began asking deep questions. Why did they want me? Why did they abandon me? These questions left a deep mark on Steve's character. Both a desire for acceptance and an attitude of not caring about rejection at all. Growing up in Los Altos, Paul Jobs invited his son to work in the garage. Crafts, electronics, small repair jobs. Steve learned his first lessons in perfectionism here. My father taught me this. Even the most invisible part must be perfect, Jobs would say, because you know, and that matters. This philosophy would guide Steve throughout his life. When he started school, Steve was very smart but rebellious. Teachers couldn't handle him. He caused trouble in class and wouldn't accept authority. When he reached 4th grade, he met a life-changing teacher, Imogene Teddy Hill. This woman saw Steve's potential and gave him special attention. Mrs. Hill was the first person to recognize my talents, Jobs would say. She taught me not just math and science, but curiosity. At the end of that year's tests, Steve performed at high school level. His family suggested moving him to a higher grade, but Steve refused. I wanted to be different, but I didn't want to be alone, he would say. When he started Homestead High School in 1967, Steve was already in adolescence, and the 60s counterculture movement was at its peak. Hippies, Vietnam War protests, rock music. Steve was very influenced by this atmosphere. He grew his hair long, started going to school barefoot, became vegetarian. He constantly argued with teachers and students. I was anti-establishment then, Jobs would say, but I was also fascinated by technology. This apparent contradiction defined Steve's character, both rebellious and creative, both anti-system and open to innovation. In his senior year of high school, Steve met Steve Wozniak. Woz was 5 years older, super smart, and a genius with electronics. The two immediately connected. When I met Woz, I realized I was facing a genius, Jobs would say. He was a technical genius. I understood people. One of their first collaborations was the Blue Box project. This device could hack the phone system to make free long-distance calls. It was illegal, but very profitable. The Blue Box project taught us a lot, Jobs would say. The power of technology and how much people would pay for it. This experience revealed Jobs' entrepreneurship ability. Woz handled the technical side, while he handled business and sales. When he graduated high school in 1972, there was only one place Steve wanted to go, Reed College in Oregon. A liberal, artistic, expensive university. His family would struggle financially, but they accepted in the face of Steve's insistence. At Reed College, Steve focused on his intellectual and spiritual search. Philosophy, Eastern religions, Zen Buddhism. He was curious about everything, but it was also very expensive education, and his family complained about the financial situation. After 6 months, Steve made a dramatic decision. He officially dropped out of university but continued attending school. A system he described as drop out but drop in. I wouldn't take expensive required courses for my family, but I would continue taking courses I was interested in, he would say. During this period, he took a calligraphy class. This class would lay the foundation for Apple's typography obsession in the future. If I hadn't taken that calligraphy class, the Mac wouldn't have had beautiful fonts, Jobs would say years later. In 1974, he completely left university and returned to the Bay Area. He found a job at a video game company called Atari. It was his first real technology job. Atari's founder, Nolan Bushnell, greatly influenced Steve. Nolan showed me that business and creativity could be combined, Jobs would say. But Steve wasn't very popular at Atari. He was very aggressive, dirty, constantly argumentative. He was actually assigned to the night shift because other employees complained about him. After 7 months, Steve quit his job and went to India for a spiritual journey. He was seeking enlightenment. The India experience was disappointing. He got sick, lived in very difficult conditions, couldn't find what he was looking for. The biggest thing I learned in India was that enlightenment wasn't outside but inside me, he would say. When he returned to America in 1975, there was a Steve Jobs who was more focused and had a clearer vision. When Steve Jobs returned to the Bay Area in 1975, he reconnected with Wozniak. Woz was working at Hewlett-Packard at the time and working on a personal computer project in his spare time. What Woz was doing was incredible, Jobs would say. He was creating the future but wasn't aware of it. When he looked at Wozniak's project, Jobs immediately saw its commercial potential. He suggested starting a company. Woz was a technical genius but a child when it came to business, Jobs would say. I showed him the vision. On April 1, 1976, Apple Computer Company was founded in Paul Jobs' garage. Steve Jobs was 21, Steve Wozniak was 26. The first project was the Apple I computer. Woz designed it, Jobs marketed it. They promoted it at homebrew computer club meetings. When I was selling the Apple I wasn't just selling computers to people, I was selling the future, Jobs would say. The first big order came from a computer store called Byte Shop, an order for 50 Apple I units. But capital was needed to produce this. Jobs sold his Volkswagen van, Wozniak sold his HP calculator. They managed to raise a total of $1,300 in capital. In the garage, with the help of friends, they produced and delivered the Apple I computers. Their first big success. That day I realized that when Woz's genius and my vision combined, miracles could happen, Jobs would say. But the real revolution would come with Apple II. In 1977, Jobs and Wozniak were working on the Apple II project. This would be not just a technical upgrade, but a completely new vision. Thanks to Jobs' insistence, Apple II would not only be functional, but also beautiful. Plastic case, clean lines, user-friendly design. I believed technology should be beautiful, Jobs would say. Function and form should go together. But serious capital was needed to bring this vision to life. Jobs began looking for venture capital. An experienced investor named Mike Markkula believed in Apple and invested $250,000. This was Apple's turning point. Mike brought not just money, but credibility, Jobs would say. We had become a serious company. Apple II was launched in April 1977. This event started the personal computer revolution. Apple II was incredibly successful. They earned millions of dollars in revenue within the first year. Steve Jobs was a millionaire at 22. Apple II's success was bigger than we expected, Jobs would say. But this was just the beginning. In 1980, Apple went public. This was the biggest public offering event to date. Jobs' net worth reached $200 million overnight. The media declared 25-year-old Steve Jobs the new star of the technology world. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine. I was very proud then, Jobs would say. But I was also under a lot of pressure. Everyone expected miracles from me. Success began to change Steve Jobs. He became more demanding, more perfectionist, more of a control freak. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely began to apply to Steve Jobs as well. In 1979, Steve Jobs visited Xerox PARC. What he saw there shocked him. Graphical user interface, mouse, windows, icons. I had seen the future, Jobs would say, and Xerox didn't understand its value. After this visit, 2 major projects began at Apple, Lisa and Macintosh. The Lisa project was bigger, more expensive, designed for business users. Jobs wasn't initially the leader of Lisa because the board found him too young and inexperienced. This situation hurt Jobs' ego deeply. I'm in my own company, but I can't manage the important project, he complained. In 1981, Jobs took control of the smaller Mac project. Mac would be consumer-focused, an affordable computer. Jobs described the Mac team as a small group worth fighting for. But the goal was to obsolete Lisa, and even Apple too. Mac would open computers to everyone in the home, Jobs would say. This was my vision. But Jobs' management style was becoming increasingly problematic. He had become a perfectionist, harsh critic, a leader who intimidated employees. Working with Steve was very difficult, employees from that period would say. He could either inspire you or completely destroy you. Lisa was released in 1983, but was too expensive, $10,000, and sales were disappointing. Macintosh was launched in 1984. Great expectations were created with the famous Super Bowl commercial. Mac was going to change the PC world, Jobs would say. We thought we were going to defeat Big Brother in 1984. But Mac also initially failed to meet sales expectations. Too slow, too expensive, software was lacking. By late 1984, Apple had big problems. Mac sales were low, the company was undergoing reorganization, the board was doubting Steve Jobs' leadership. Jobs had brought John Sculley from PepsiCo as CEO as a solution to this situation. Sculley was an experienced business executive. The reason I brought John was to take Apple to the next level, Jobs would say. But this was the beginning of my own end. Strategic disagreements began between Sculley and Jobs. Sculley wanted to focus on profit, Jobs on innovation and vision. A critical board meeting was held in May 1985. On the agenda was reducing Steve Jobs' operational responsibilities. Jobs was shocked when he learned this. They're trying to remove me from my own company, he rebelled. A board vote was taken. Steve Jobs' operational authority was removed. Only the chairman title remained. That was the worst day of my life, Jobs would say. I felt like I had been rejected by my own child. He remained in a meaningless position at the company for months. No one consulted him. He wasn't informed of important decisions. On September 17, 1985, Steve Jobs officially resigned from Apple. Apple was the work of my life, Jobs would say. Losing it was like losing my identity. The media wrote that Jobs had been exiled from the technology world. At 30, his career seemed finished. Everyone thought I was finished, Jobs would say. Maybe they were right. But Steve Jobs' story wasn't ending here. The real battle was just beginning. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs experienced an identity crisis. Since his late 20s, he had defined himself with Apple. The first few months were very difficult, Jobs would say. I didn't know what to do. Apple was my everything. But Jobs couldn't stay idle for long. He decided to start a new computer company, Next. Next's goal was to make super powerful workstations for higher education and business markets. With Next, I wanted to do what Apple couldn't, Jobs would say. Real perfection. He transferred 5 key employees from Apple for Next. This angered Apple, and a legal battle began. Next computers were technically very advanced but very expensive. Only universities and specialized businesses could buy them. Next was a very good computer but too niche, Jobs would say. It didn't appeal to the mass market. During the same period, another adventure began, PIXAR. In 1986, Jobs bought Lucasfilm's computer graphics division from George Lucas for $10 million. When I bought PIXAR, I thought it was just cool technology, Jobs would say. But after meeting Disney, I realized this was the future of entertainment. PIXAR's first big project was Toy Story, partnering with Disney, the first fully computer-animated feature film. Toy Story was released in 1995 and was a great success. The same year, PIXAR went public and Steve Jobs became a billionaire again. PIXAR's success reduced the pain of being fired from Apple a little, Jobs would say. But I still wanted to win Apple back. Meanwhile, Apple was experiencing big troubles. Microsoft had become dominant, Mac sales had dropped, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. In 1996, Apple was in crisis. Market share had dropped to 3%. Its financial situation was critical. CEOs were changing, but no solution could be found. Apple's new CEO, Gil Amelio, was looking for an external solution to the operating system problem. He evaluated Next OS. I realized Apple needed me, Jobs would say. After 12 years, my child was coming back to me. In December 1996, Apple bought Next for $429 million. Steve Jobs returned to Apple as an advisor. He was being careful initially. It wasn't revenge, it was a rescue operation, he would say. In July 1997, Gil Amelio resigned and Steve Jobs became interim CEO. When I took the ICEO title, I was sure I would save Apple, Jobs would say, because Apple was in my DNA. His first job was to simplify the product line. There were dozens of confusing products. Jobs reduced them to 4 categories: desktop and portable, consumer and professional. Focus means knowing how to say no, Jobs would say. In 1998, he introduced the iMac. Translucent plastic, colorful design, internet-focused. iMac was proof that Apple was back, Jobs would say. With the Think Different campaign, Apple had become cool again. iMac was a great success. Apple's sales and stock price began to rise. After 12 years, I was finally taking Apple in the right direction, Jobs would say. Between 1998-2011, Steve Jobs experienced the biggest innovation streak in technology history. After iMac came iPod, 2001. It changed the music industry with the slogan, 1,000 songs in your pocket. iPod transformed Apple from being a computer company to a digital lifestyle company, Jobs would say. iTunes Store opened in 2003. It laid the foundation for legal music downloads. iPhone was introduced in 2007. This wasn't just a phone, it was creating a completely new category. When I made the iPhone announcement, I knew we were changing the future, Jobs would say. iPad came in 2010. It created the tablet computer category. Each product launch increased Apple's value. In 2011, Apple became the world's most valuable company. If I hadn't been fired from Apple, none of these products would exist, Jobs would say. Because firing made me a better leader. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003. But he kept this secret and continued working. Death is life's best invention, Jobs would say in his famous Stanford speech. Because it clears out the old to make way for the new. Steve Jobs passed away on October 5, 2011. The legacy he left behind had changed not just Apple, but the DNA of the entire technology world. Steve's greatest achievement was making excellence normal. His successor Tim Cook would say. Steve Jobs' story isn't just a tech entrepreneur's success story. This is the story of the power of never giving up, even in life's darkest moments. It's proof of how a man fired by his own company can return and create the world's most valuable company. So what about your story? Maybe you've also experienced firing moments in your life. Maybe you've also been rejected, pushed aside, told, "We don't need you anymore." But Jobs' story shows us this. Every ending can be the beginning of a new opening. The main principles that changed Steve Jobs' life are: 1. See failure as a learning opportunity. Jobs described being fired from Apple as one of the best things in his life. You too should see setbacks as growth opportunities. 2. Diversify your passions. Next and PIXAR experiences made Jobs a better leader. Gaining experience in different areas allows you to return stronger to your main goal. 3. Don't lose your focus. When he returned, Jobs' first job was to simplify the product line. Don't scatter your energy in life either. Focus on the most important things. 4. Be perfectionist but also pragmatic. Jobs was both visionary and execution-focused. Keep your dreams big, but realize them step by step. 5. Use death as motivation. Jobs used to say, "Remembering you are going to die. Don't forget that your time is limited and prioritize accordingly." 6. Think different. The most important rule is questioning rules. Challenge conventional wisdom. Think differently. In Steve Jobs' own words, "Sometimes life can hit you with a brick, but don't lose faith. The only thing that can keep you going is loving what you do." After being fired from Apple, Jobs also said, "I suffered a lot during that period, but now I understand it was the best thing that happened to me, because the weight of success turned into the lightness of being a beginner again." Important questions for you. Which firing in your life actually freed you? Which rejection led you to a better place? Difficulty you're experiencing now could be the foundation of your future success. The most important lesson you should take from Steve Jobs' story is this: the biggest failures are the secret beginnings of the biggest successes. Jobs said in his 2005 Stanford graduation speech, "You can only connect the dots looking backward, not forward." So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. your heart, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life." And he added, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." This isn't just Steve Jobs' story. This is the story of the potential within each of us. A transformation story that each of us can experience. Remember, Steve Jobs was once also a man seen as finished. He was also fired from the company he created. He was also a person who was told it's over. But he didn't give up. He learned, developed, and returned. You can do it too. Maybe today you feel fired. In work life, in relationships, in your projects, but remember that every ending is actually a new beginning. As Jobs said, most of the time, life hits you in the head with a brick, but don't lose faith. Your story starts here. After watching this video, ask yourself these questions. What will my Apple moment be? In which area will I rebuild myself? How will I return stronger from where I was fired? One final reminder, Steve Jobs' greatest work wasn't Apple. His greatest work was his own story, the story from being fired to changing the world. And the story you're going to write isn't finished yet. Maybe the best pages haven't even been written yet. As Rise Stories will continue to bring you inspiring stories like this every week, because we know that there's a Steve Jobs inside every person. They just need to turn the right firing moment into the right motivation. If you liked this video, don't forget to like it. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more inspiring stories. And share with us in the comments, what was your firing moment and how did you turn it into an opportunity? Remember, after every ending comes a new beginning. After every firing, a legend can be born. Your legend starts now. Think different, stay hungry, stay foolish.